We are now just 51 days away from the fiscal cliff, when $644 billion in tax hikes and spending cuts will kick in next year unless the president and Congress make a deal. We've invited 4 congressional leaders who will be at the center of any compromise to discuss what's possible and what isn't. Senators Bob Corker and Kent Conrad, and Congressman Tom Price and Chris VanHollen. Gentlemen, welcome back to Fox News Sunday. Good to have you all here. Senator Corker, let me start with you. How real is the cliff? Can Washington figure out a way in just 51 days to cut trillions from the deficit, or are you going to just get an extension and kick the can down the road?
Well, certainly I hope we don't kick the can down the road. We all know what the issues are, Chris. We've had 2 dry runs already. Nothing has changed. And I hope at least we'll go substantially down the road towards solving the problem. People are conflating the fiscal cliff with fiscal reform. And I know Kent and I and Chris and others, Tom, have been working for a long time on fiscal reform. And what I think we don't need to lose our eye on is the fact that that's what needs to be solved. So I'm hopeful. When I listen to the Speaker, when I listen to the President, I think there's room. I've said from day one, the key to solving this is Medicare reform. If we can agree to Medicare reform, I think the other pieces will fall in place.
Now, Senator Conrad, there's some talk among Democrats about going over the cliff, letting all the tax hikes kick in, letting all the spending cuts kick in, and blame it on the Republicans.
Well, I don't know where you're hearing that. You certainly don't hear that from me. I've spent 5 years trying to put together a package in a bipartisan way to get us back on a sound fiscal course. And I think it's very clear that we have a near-term problem. We've got to make sure that we are doing everything we can to strengthen economic growth. And we have a longer-term problem that's an unsustainable fiscal course for the nation. That requires revenue reform, which is Bob Corker talking about fundamental reform. We absolutely need it in our entitlement programs, Medicare and Social Security. We need it in the revenue side of the equation. And I should hasten to say the Social Security piece I don't think should be part of a deficit reduction package, but we do need to address Social Security because it's headed for insolvency as well.
All right, we're going to talk about entitlements and spending in a moment, but let's talk about taxes, which has gotten most of the attention. Congressman VanHollen, House Speaker John Boehner offered a compromise this week in which he said, yes, I'm willing to put more revenue on the table, but through closing deductions, ending loopholes, not through raising rates. Can you accept a compromise as part of this whole deal that doesn't raise the Bush tax rate on the wealthy?
Well, here's the issue. How much revenue are we going to generate as part of a balanced package? And I take my lead on this from Simpson-Bowles and their framework. And in their framework, they assume the amount of revenue as if you started tax reform from a 39% rate. That's part of their built-in assumption. So I'm all for doing tax reform. The issue is from what starting point? And I think that the Simpson-Bowles starting point, which assumes that revenue from 39%, is the right way to go to get the mix that they got in hitting their deficit reduction target. But look, if what Speaker Boehner was saying is that he's truly willing to get what we consider Congressional Budget Office scorable revenue, then we can begin to work with one another. If what he's simply saying is what a lot of Republicans used to say, which is we're just going to lower rates on the wealthy, and that's going to somehow generate enough economic...
No, he was clearly talking about closing loopholes and deductions.
But Grover Norquist doesn't think that's what he meant. The jury,
he's not the speaker.
No, but the jury's out still on the... I thought the tone... Let me just be clear. The tone was good. I think the jury's still out on exactly what the substance of what he said is. Maybe, I mean, others may be able to clarify, but he said something in a very artful way, which different people heard differently.
But I would ask you directly. Now, it could be a yes or no. Are you willing to accept more revenue if it doesn't mean that the Bush tax cut has to be rescinded for the wealthy and it rises from 35 to 39%, if they can make the math work?
The issue is the math. So that's why I think the starting point should be going back to Clinton-era rates, and then proceeding with tax reform, as the Speaker may have been talking about if he was genuinely talking about eliminating revenues to eliminating, loopholes as part of an effort to generate
Congressman
revenue.
Price, the President made one offer on Friday, which is let's, right now, extend the Bush tax cut rates for the 98% of the people that are making less than $250,000. He says I'll sign it right away. Take a look.
Let's not wait. Even as we're negotiating a broader deficit reduction package, let's extend the middle class tax cuts right now. And I've got the pen, ready to sign the bill right away. I'm ready to do it.
Now, Democrats say that you, and I talk about Republicans, won't accept that because you want to hold the tax cuts for the middle class hostage until you get what you want on tax cuts for the wealthy.
Now, Chris, what we want are real solutions. House Republicans want real solutions. And to us, that means that you've got to have economic growth. A tax increase never created a new job in this country. And so what we need is economic growth and vitality. Get the economy rolling. Get those jobs being created. That means, yes, more revenue.
Sir, let me interrupt just because I want to ask you directly. Would you accept this piecemeal, let's just pass the tax, the extension of the Bush tax cuts for the 98% of people under 250?
It doesn't make any sense to us to raise taxes on job creators at this time of economic challenge. The equation is revenue and spending, and we can increase revenue without increasing the tax rates on anybody in this country. We can lower the rates, broaden the base, close the loopholes, as you've discussed, put in place pro-growth policies in energy and health care and the regulatory policy, and then address the spending. And the spending that has to be addressed is Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
We are going to get to spending in a second, but just so I can clear this up, you're not, Boehner seemed to be saying, I'm going to close some of those loopholes and use some of that revenue, not just count on growth, use some of the revenue from closing loopholes to cut the deficit. Are you accepting that or not?
I think that's the formula. That's the way that we could reach agreement, and I think that's what many of us are saying, that you can close the loopholes.
But it's not just growth. It's actually taking some of the money, the tax expenditures, and through loopholes, and giving and using it as a deficit saving.
As long as you close the loopholes, you limit the deductions, limit the credits, you can lower the rates and broaden the base. That's the formula for a solution, and that's a real solution.
So, Senator Corker, you have a draft plan that you've been circulating to a number of members in the Senate. Is there a deal here?
I think there is a deal. Look, the yin and yang of this is we know there has to be revenues. And I think, look, I haven't met a wealthy Republican or Democrat in Tennessee that's not willing to contribute more as long as they know we've solved the problem. So the yin of revenue, we understand, and I think there's a very good pro-growth way of putting that in place so you're actually getting revenues from people like me and other folks that make above X dollars. But what you have to have tied to that is true entitlement reform.
We're going to get to
people know we've solved the problem.
One last question, and then I promise we'll get to that. Senator Conrad, I mean, is there the basis of a deal here? No, it's not raising the Bush tax rates, but it is tax reform where you close the loopholes. Will that work?
It could. Look, I think the reality of Bowles-Simpson, which I was a part of, actually lowered rates but raised more revenue. And it did it by closing off preferences, exclusions, deductions, and it equalized capital gains and dividends with other tax rates. If you really want to go to where many of us think the tax code is unfair, you've got people who are paying very close as an effective rate of the top rate of 35%, people who are much, much wealthier paying an effective rate of 13 or 14%. That's really unfair. How does that happen? Well, it largely happens because there is a 20-point differential between capital gains and ordinary income. 15% for capital gains and dividends, 35% for ordinary income. That differential really, I don't think, is justified.
Okay, let's get, and I know you've been champing at the bit to get to spending and entitlement reform, which clearly has to be part of any deal. Congressman VanHollen, a year ago, August, when Boehner and Obama were involved in these debt talks, the grand bargain that blew up, the president put on the table raising the eligibility age for Medicare and slowing the cost of living adjustment for Social Security. Could you accept those?
Well, I'd have to look at the overall deal, Chris. And we've already made some significant reforms to Medicare to achieve some savings. There is a complication on this issue, which is the Supreme Court decision that said that some states don't have to cover people on Medicaid could leave lots of individuals in that age group vulnerable. And so that's a major complicating factor as we move forward. But look, I'm willing to look at, and I think Democrats, clearly the president, is willing to look at everything.
Major entitlement reform.
Well, everyone has a different meaning of major entitlement reform. After all, the Affordable Care Act made some significant changes and savings as part of the Medicare program. Of course, during the last campaign, but seriously, there were lots of ads blasting Democrats for what was some serious reform with respect to Medicare. The difference being that we looked for savings by changing incentives within the program as opposed to savings to Medicare simply by transferring those costs onto beneficiaries. That is not the way to go, that kind of voucher plan, in my view.
Congressman Price brings me to Obamacare. Speaker Boehner was asked this week whether the Republican drive to kill Obamacare is dead. Here's what he said.
It's pretty clear that the president was reelected. Obamacare is the law of the land.
Question: do most House Republicans, do you agree with Speaker Boehner that repeal of Obamacare with this election, with his reelection, is dead?
No, as a physician, I can tell you that the reason we're not opposed to the president's health care law because of the election. We're opposed because it's bad policy and it's bad for patients across this land. We absolutely must get a handle on the spending in this country, and in order to do that, it has to be through Medicare reform, Medicaid reform, and Social Security reform. All three of those programs, under current law, are destined for failure. So we need fundamental reform so that we can save and strengthen and secure these programs for this generation and future generations. That's what real solutions look like.
The election, in the sense, yes, you still have the majority in the House, but you lost the election on the presidential level. You're not going to kill Obamacare for the next 4 years.
I think what the election said is that the American people don't want unified government here in Washington. They want divided government, which means that we've got to get together and solve these remarkable challenges that we have. But they have to be solved with real solutions. They can't be solved with things that don't solve the problem. And that's what we've been doing in this town for years and years. That's not what the American people want.
All right, let me go to the two senators to end this, because I come away from this, yeah, there's a little, but a lot of the same old arguments are coming up. Are we going to go over the cliff or not?
No.
But is that because you're just kicking it down the road, or because you'll come to a solution in 51 days?
I don't think we're going to go over the cliff. What I think would be a travesty for our country is the reason we don't go over the cliff is we totally kick the can down the road. I mean, look, we know what all the problems are. We've been through 2 dry runs. There's nothing new. Let's make a huge down payment on this problem. And then this is going to take years of work. So look, I'm optimistic.
I
am.
I know
this
conversation here.
Nah.
Do you think that there's the basis for a deal?
I think there's the basis for the deal because I think finally Democrats are willing to accept, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but I think they know that Republicans really are willing to put revenues on the table if we can do it in a pro-growth way, and there's a way of doing that. And you saw the Washington Post editorial this morning laid out $750 billion, an easy way of getting there. So there's a way of getting there on the revenue side. The real question is, can we come to terms on the entitlement side? By the way, when you deal with entitlements, you really don't do anything that deals with the economy in the short term. So it's the very best way. A $27 trillion problem exists right now with Medicare, unfunded liabilities. That's where the focus needs to be. We can get to the appropriate revenue mix if we do that.
Senator Conrad, you're a lame duck in the lame duck session. As your final act before you leave office, is there the basis for a deal here, realistically?
I absolutely believe there is. Look, you can't settle every detail in these next few weeks. What you can do is agree on a framework agreement that sets out for the committees of jurisdiction how much they need to save, how much money needs to be raised. What we can also do is have a significant down payment so the markets understand we're serious about this. What we could also do is have a backstop so that if the committees of jurisdiction did not perform, there would be a real consequence.
That was the fiscal cliff. That's what was supposed to happen here.
The difference is the fiscal cliff was designed not to happen. That is, the sequester, across-the-board cuts, $1.2 trillion, defense, non-defense, was designed to be so onerous nobody would accept it. What we need to have as a backup is something that would actually be good policy if the operating committees didn't act.
Gentlemen, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you all for coming in, and we'll be watching every step of the next 51 days. Good luck.
Thanks, Chris.